Hi, and welcome back to Guff Stuff Weekly Podcast. I'm Javen.
And I'm Guff.
Today we're going to talk about Guff's favorite thing in the world,
Oh no. What is my favorite thing in the world?
factory automation games.
Oh yeah, my favorite. Yeah, sure. We'll go with that. Not my favorite thing in the world,
Oh,
but it is fun.
I thought I was wrong once, but I was mistaken.
You were wrong. You were what?
I said I thought I was wrong once, but I was mistaken.
Yeah, they are fun.
Yeah, so what is a factory automation game?
Maybe that's what I should be asking you.
Yeah, okay,
Okay, what is a factory automation game?
that's fair. So a factory automation game is a kind of broad genre for the most part. It can cover everything from city builders to survival crafting to puzzle games to simulation games. Long story short, what makes a factory automation game is that typically you are given some raw output of resources.
Right.
You might have to get those resources yourself. In the case of something like Factorio,
Yep.
you have to place a miner down or hand mine. And then what you're doing is you're typically taking those raw resources and turning them into more complicated and more complex resources,
Right.
usually to achieve some sort of end game goal. And that's essentially the core concept of the game. The automation comes into place in the fact that you don't have to actually do anything once you set up the infrastructure for automation. So a great example, and I'll be referring to this game a lot, it's kind of the one that really popularized the genre, if not the first one, is Factorio.
Okay.
Um, and the automation comes into place when you put down a miner, it puts its contents onto a conveyor belt. That conveyor belt goes to a furnace, which then smelts it, puts it on another belt, which then goes to a machine, which then makes more furnaces and miners so that you can make more furnaces and miners automatically.
Okay.
That's the general idea. And then of course there's like making engines to make cars and trains. There's electricity to power everything. Some of the things run on coal power, so you just put a chunk of coal or wood or whatever in,
Right.
and then they'll work. Some things require electricity, which then you have to generate electricity by whatever means are available. Wind turbines, steam generators, all sorts of different things, nuclear power. And
Which I imagine you wouldn't have access to at the beginning of the game.
in Factorio, you have access to steam power and coal burning power essentially at the start of the game.
Right.
Games like Satisfactory, I believe all you have access to is burning leaves at the start of the game,
Yeah,
essentially.
yeah, I don't remember what they call it, but
They're biomass
yeah,
burners, is what they're
biomass. Yeah.
called. And then there's some other various ones, like I recently was playing Desynced, and the power generation in that is at the start of the game, you just have an infinite power generator, but it's capped at a certain limit.
Okay.
So like it only outputs so much power,
Kind of
but it's
like
infinite.
Astroneer.
Yeah, like an Astroneer. That's another.
Although that's not a complete factory game, that it has some aspects of.
It does have, yeah, and automation is one of those things that you can build a game entirely around it, or you can have it as a addition to an already existing game.
Right.
In the case of like Astroneer, Astroneer is a survival crafting game with exploration elements
Right.
that you can automate, but you don't have to.
Right. Okay. Good. So, if you were going to pick for the type of factory game, 'cause I know Satisfactory can be first person, and
Yeah,
then Factorio's top down.
yeah. So there are 2D and 3D,
Right.
more or less, factory
Excuse me.
games. Um,
Which one do you prefer?
they both have their challenges and benefits.
Right.
Um,
I think with the 2D game, the benefits, if you don't mind me saying, would be that you could see everything
yeah, it looks
laid
kind of
out.
like a bitmap,
Right.
and
And so you can just kind of move things around, see where the
Yeah,
bottlenecks
you
are
can
pretty easily.
zoom out and it's very visual. You can see what's going on very easily.
I know it's Satisfactory. When I had bottlenecks, sometimes you're running down miles of line looking for the
Yeah.
choke point where the splitter was not working properly. Or
Yep. And one of the things about so the benefits of the 2D is that yes, you can see everything. You can understand how it works fairly easily. It's probably the more approachable way to actually learn how to min max and be efficient in a factory.
right,
And that's generally the benefit. It's also easier to run on a computer, which is another benefit.
right, you can run on
You can
almost
run it on
anything.
a
Right,
potato, essentially.
right,
Um, the benefits of 3D building in games such as Infinifactory and Satisfactory is that actually, let me go to the caveats of 2D
okay,
first.
yep,
So the negatives of 2D is that you can only build in two directions.
right,
So you can't go over
right.
another belt.
Can't go under, can't go around.
There are some things like in Factorio, there are underground belts. So you can go under
Right,
other belts, but it's only so far. And then you're also limited by space of like, well, I want it to dump onto this belt, but I only have one square and I need to turn it. And it makes designing your base a little bit more challenging in 2D um, because you have additional constraints.
right,
That's probably the main caveat of two-dimensional factory builders is that you can only go left, right, up, and down, and then sometimes under one layer or over one layer,
right,
depending upon how you look at it.
right,
Now, 3D, the benefit of 3D is immediately following that, what we just talked about, you can build any direction.
right.
You can build 17 belts on top of each other and then just plug them in wherever you want to.
Right. Yeah, which
You're not
is
limited
interesting.
by.
Right.
You can get some pretty compact designs that way. Like you can have machines that are just right next to each other in a long row. And you can do that in Factorio as well in the 2D ones. Um, but you can put multiple ingredients in rather than just one ingredient into another ingredient.
Right.
You could plug five ingredients in one line rather than having five belts wide,
Right.
and it just it makes your builds a little bit more compact. And then the other nice thing about the 3D building up and down is you can lay foundations, and if you want to, you can put all of your conveyor belts and pipes underneath the factory
Yeah.
so that when you want to walk around it, you're not walking all over belts and running into things and stuff like that.
Right. Yeah. I noticed that when I was playing the Satisfactory.
Yeah.
So, are there technology trees that you advance? I mean, how do you advance the game
So
in either of them?
the
In either of
the
those
primary
cases?
two I will be talking about for this is Satisfactory and Factorio.
Right.
They're kind of the two most ubiquitous factory
Right.
builders.
Them are the ones I know of.
So in Factorio, you crash land on a planet. You basically have a set number of technologies that you have, like steam power, miners, and some other things. And then what you end up doing is you have to craft science packs in Factorio, and there's seven different types of science packs. Each
Okay.
one of them correspondingly more and more difficult, but they unlock more and more features. So
Right.
you get more ingredients, more processing trees, stuff like that. Um, and then what you end up doing is you typically in these games, um, you start out and it's like put two things together, it will create a science pack that you then deliver to somewhere and it will process it over an amount of time. And then at the end of that, you will get more technology,
More stuff to work with.
more stuff to work with.
Gotcha.
That's the general gameplay loop, and it's how they go about it is different between Satisfactory and Factorio. Satisfactory, you put things into science labs that are on the ground.
Right.
So you make your red science pack, let's say, you put it on a belt, or you can hand feed it, it doesn't matter. And
Right.
then you put it in a lab, and then the lab starts cycling and using red science packs to progress your technology. In Satisfactory, there's several different types of technology
Right.
trees. Um, there's an overarching tier system.
Yep.
So there's like tier 0 is where you start if you're doing the tutorial, and then it goes all the way through tier 8. You usually unlock them 2 at a time. So you get tier 1 and 2 together, tier 3 and 4 together, 5 and 6, so on and so forth. Um, the way that you advance tiers in Satisfactory is you have something called a space elevator, which is this giant machine that goes all the way up to the sky and it has like 80 inputs and
Yeah,
it's just crazy.
it is crazy.
And then they request specific parts that you can pin to your hotbar when you have your space elevator down,
Yeah,
and they're very complicated, like extraordinarily complicated.
takes a lot of different machines and a lot of different crafting to get those parts made.
Exactly. And then once you deliver X amount of them to the space elevator, you press a button and you send it up the space elevator, and they go, whoa! And the angels come out of the clouds, and you get the next level of technology.
Right, and then it gets more complicated.
And it gets more complicated. Now, within those tiers of technology, there's probably, I would say, 5 to 8 researches within each tier. And then all you have to do for those is you put in like usually intermediate products, which is something like it's not a completely finished product. It's a product that you make and use as raw resources or to build more machines, stuff like that.
Yeah.
It's an intermediate product. And usually what you're doing is you're getting more and more complicated intermediate products that you're dumping into um, the hub, which is a building that's kind of like a science lab and base headquarters respawn point in Satisfactory. And then you unlock specific technologies.
Right.
So each technology, specific technology, is locked behind a tier, and then so you make the super complicated parts, and then you make a little bit less complicated parts.
Right. Yeah, and then sometimes you just get quality of life.
Yeah, some things are quality of life, and then Satisfactory also has an additional, quote unquote, technology tree in the MAM, the molecular analysis machine, and that's where you go around and explore and find things on planet, plug it into this machine, and it gives you extra free technologies, essentially.
Gives you, like the power worms and
like the power slugs and stuff like that.
Yep. Good.
I guess I could talk a little bit about maybe some of the other diverging, branching factory games.
Well, yeah. Well, I don't know. Let's just stick with the main ones.
Stick with the Factorio and Satisfactory.
There's plenty to go over, I think. Okay, so in Factorio and in Satisfactory and some of the other ones, you can add them in there, of course. Are there environmental and logistical factors that you must consider while you're...
Yeah, okay, let's break that into a couple different ones. Let's start with
you crash land in Factorio.
Yeah.
I mean, where's the danger? Same thing with Satisfactory. What's the danger?
Yeah, so I'll start with the environmental first, and then we'll move on to the logistical. So the environmental factor, quote unquote, we'll start with Factorio, is that all of your machines spew out pollution.
Oh, of course.
So some spew out more,
right?
Some spew out less, and you can add things to machines to modify this. Now the pollution eventually spreads, and it gets absorbed by trees and the ground, and you can kill trees if you're spewing out too much, and then you end up spewing out more because there's no trees to absorb it. But what's the point of the pollution? Well, the point of the pollution is that there are these biter nests, which are these kind of Starship Trooper alien insectoid bugs that if pollution hits where they spawn, they start absorbing it. And if they absorb enough of it, a huge wave of them will come and start attacking anything that's spewing pollution.
Gotcha.
So
Mother Nature fights back with bugs.
Exactly.
Okay.
And then there's also a evolution factor where if they eat X amount of pollution or if you kill X amount of them, blah 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 blah, they evolve and they get tougher. So it's kind of a natural scaling thing. Like your factory gets bigger and you can produce more intense military infrastructure.
Jeez.
But the bugs are also getting more difficult. Big. So it's this balance of let's advance our factory, but also let's advance our military so that we can protect our factory.
Right.
And you got to find a little bit of a balance.
Yeah, you don't want to fall behind in one and get ahead in the other, because then you just end up having more problems than it's worth.
Exactly. And then in Satisfactory is a little bit more laid back. The flora and fauna on the Satisfactory planet are inherently hostile. So like, but it's a proximity thing.
Right.
So if the player is in the proximity of, let's say, a hog, which is one of the base enemies, the hog will attempt to attack you.
Right.
Um, there's no pollution mechanic or anything like that, so they'll never attack your buildings,
Right.
which is nice.
Yeah, that's
It
always a
makes it a little
bonus.
bit more laid back, but it makes expanding and exploring a little bit dangerous.
Right. Yeah.
So if you're
You know.
trying to find nitrogen gas somewhere and you don't know where it is, you have to run around the map and try to find it. And
Yeah,
then
I do.
run...
I did notice that the it progressively got harder the farther away from the starting zone that you got.
Yeah, and certain starting zones are more difficult, and there's certain spots in the map that you just don't want to be on until you have actual guns and things like that,
Okay.
because they're quite spooky.
Okay.
You can Once you get pretty good at the game, you can kind of know just where things are. And the nice thing about the map of Satisfactory is that it's the same every time. So once you learn the map, you're good to
In
go.
Factorio, if not.
No, Factorio uses seeded maps,
Okay.
which I guess this is a fair segue into the logistics
Okay.
issue. So the logistical challenges that occur in Factorio mostly have to do with transporting bulk amount of resources from point A to point B. And the main issue there is once you start scaling up, you only have 30 miners, let's say, on your starting patch of iron.
Okay.
Um, they're finite resources in Factorio. So you
Okay.
can mine out and have 0 iron left on your patch.
Right.
And so that causes an issue sometimes in the fact that, oh, I don't have any iron left. I have to go look for more iron. Well, then it might be halfway, it might be not halfway, but a fair way across the map. And you might have to go through trees and forests and canyons and lakes
All
and all
kinds of
sorts of stuff
problems.
to find it. And then you have to transport it back. Well, that's where trains and all the other big infrastructure as far as logistics come into play.
Right.
Satisfactory has a similar um, logistical problem, but it's a little bit different because in Satisfactory you never can mine out your resources.
Right. Yeah. They just infinitely.
Yeah, they're infinite resources.
Right.
The logistical challenge in Satisfactory usually lies in how quick can I get things from point A to point B to make sure that everything is functioning at a good efficiency.
Right. Making sure. Yeah. And then yeah, I know that when I was playing Satisfactory, there was that the biggest logistic issue I ran across was you start off with tier one stuff.
Mm-hmm.
You go make mile long belts to get your copper from point A to point B. Then you upgrade to tier two and tier three and tier four, and now you got to upgrade that whole line. You're
Yep.
like,
And usually the upgrading in Satisfactory is like level 1 belt just requires iron plates, which are
right,
very easy to make.
right,
But then you get to tier 2 belt and it's reinforced iron plates. And anybody who's played Satisfactory knows that that first initial making of reinforced iron plates is like 2 a minute.
right.
And it's just
It
super
takes, yeah,
slow.
it
And
takes
you're like, oh
forever.
my God, how am I ever going to get enough of these?
Yeah,
And pretty soon, later on, you have just thousands of them and you don't know what to do with them.
yeah, because you spend so much time making them. You're like, oh gosh,
And
how
then
do
you
I
need
do
all of a sudden steel. And you're
right?
like, oh my God, how am I going to get the steel beams? This is so hard. I can't
Yeah,
do it. And eventually you have thousands of those, and then you get reinforced. And finally you get to the aluminum, and that's just, when you start that, it gets crazy. And the recipes, the main challenge in these games is that the recipes become quite convoluted.
get a little bit. Yeah, they get a little
And
crazy.
I kind of want to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah,
So in Factorio, um, the recipe chain gets to be just more or less more complicated materials go in, and an even more complicated material comes out.
right.
And then you're using that's the difficulty, is that it might require some super difficult parts to produce that are slow, and the resources are limited for them. But there isn't really any anything past that.
Right.
Um, there is a slight case of it in Factorio, but I kind of want to talk about Satisfactory because I think they do a better job of it.
Okay.
So Satisfactory has the same thing where you need more and more complex materials, but Satisfactory also has byproducts. So a good example is aluminum processing. And this
Okay.
is like one of the first things that really just like hurts your head.
Okay.
And oil is another good one, and plastics and rubber. So in Satisfactory, what happens is if you want to turn crude oil into plastic,
Okay.
it will output. You need just crude oil, and then it turns into plastic and heavy oil residue.
Okay.
And now you could pump out as much plastic as you want, but if the output of heavy oil residue fills up, plastic will stop producing because you need to deal with the excess byproducts to actually make
Okay.
what you need. So you have to deal with that heavy oil residue.
Right.
Well, all of a sudden now you're looking through and like, what can I actually do with heavy oil residue? Oh, I can make fuel out of it. So then you take all that heavy oil residue and you put it in a fuel processing unit, and now you have all this fuel. But if that fuel fills up, it'll back up the heavy oil residue, which will stop plastic.
Right. Which again, yeah.
So then you need to find a way to burn off the fuel. Well, there's fuel generators and stuff like that. Now the only thing in Factorio has something similar. Satisfactory has in the late game process has a lot of this. It's a lot of rerouting outputs back into inputs to do all sorts of crazy things.
Right.
Satisfactory, it's just advanced oil processing is the
Okay.
only thing that does this, and it's that you get essentially 3 different oils or oil products from crude oil. You
Interesting.
get heavy oil, light oil, and petroleum gas.
Okay.
But if any of the outputs fill up,
Then
you
the whole
aren't
process
producing,
stops.
the whole process stops. So that's usually one of the big logistical challenges and one of the first hurdles for Factorio players, especially newer Factorio players,
Right.
is how do I deal with all this? Well, usually there's recipes in place that you can process things into other things and kind of fix, quote unquote, fix your ratios.
Right.
Um, and yeah, that's the general idea.
Okay. Well, so then with these problems, is there you have to set up the machine yourself, or is there like a template you can use?
So a lot of them, okay, so I can answer that in 2 ways. Most of the machines, you lay them down, and then there's a recipe
Yep.
that you can select that you want the machine to run.
And that's in both.
That's in both games. And so, like, you put down an oil refinery, for example. While using that oil refinery, you can do about 10 different processes with it.
Right.
And then you just follow your chain of whatever it is you want to do. You just look at it and go like, oh, well, this is outputting heavy oil residue. So then you make another refinery and say
Right.
heavy oil residue into this. And
There's no template that you can just like one factory, one machine you can lay down that takes care of all that problem.
no, that's part of the challenge of the game.
So, is there a way to set up templates in either of the games?
Yes, there's a blueprint feature
Okay.
in both games.
Okay.
And so what the blueprint feature lets you do is it lets you build a entire network of processes. So like you could build it could be as simple as blueprinting a bunch of miners together that all
Right.
feed into one belt, and then you save that blueprint, and then you can just slap it down and just paint by numbers and fill it in. Same thing. Satisfactory is a little bit different because it'll automatically build the blueprint.
Okay.
But yeah, you can have all of your inputs and outputs routed. You only have to solve it once, essentially.
Okay. So yeah,
And then you
I
can
hadn't
look
got
at
to that part in Satisfactory yet.
Yeah, and honestly, you don't need blueprints to play the games.
No.
But once you start getting into scaling
Well, I
up,
was just thinking that when I'm building, say like when you're building the 3 or 4 deep layer parts where you know you're going to need a smelter, you know you're going to need a miner, you know you're going to need splitters, then you know you're going to need the manufacturer, or I think that's what they call them in Satisfactory.
Yep. There's
And then after that, you need the
assemblers,
assembler.
Yeah.
So it'd be nice to have a blueprint where I can just run out somewhere and go, here, I have all these parts, pow. It's already pre-set up for me. It's already perfectly set up with the distances I need. I see. I didn't know
Yep.
that.
And usually what people do is they blueprint each section of the process. So you'll blueprint all of your smelters together. And then usually they make it what's called tileable, which is like that you can just lay it down and then lay it down next to it, lay it down. And you can add it infinitely or cut off to have just as much as you need.
Right.
And then in the next process, you do the same thing. Same thing.
I didn't know that.
It's pretty nice. I think it's locked behind tier 4.
Okay. Yeah.
So you can't get blueprints for a little while.
I think I'm at tier 3, 4. I don't think I've unlocked any of it.
I think you need steel processing to get blueprints.
Interesting.
But
Okay.
it's really nice. It's
And
extraordinarily
Factorio
handy.
has something similar.
Factorio, you can just blueprint right away.
Jeez.
And you can import blueprints between games, which I think Satisfactory has as well now too.
Okay, so like if you come up with a really cool blueprint, like you were showing me earlier,
Yep.
on taking two lines, splitting them up so it splits into six,
Yeah.
you don't have to go back and figure it out every single time.
Exactly.
You just figured out one, save it as a blueprint, and
And I find there's a balance because if you blueprint everything, then you're just playing the game the same way every time, and it's
well,
not.
of course.
You're not getting anything different. You're not trying anything new. You're just using what
Well,
works. But there are some quality of life blueprints that are just good to have.
right. Well, I was just thinking that I know that there's the amount of time you can play in both games is probably different. I know there's speed runs of how quick you can beat. I'm sure the speed runs are satisfactory too, but I don't know
It's kind of
how
a weird
somebody
one,
can
yeah.
beat speed of satisfactory in a few hours
Yeah,
because the number of things you have to build.
yeah. I haven't seen. I've seen like speedruns of Satisfactory, but it's usually like get to tier 2.
Yeah, right.
There's
Yeah,
never like a beat the game.
because I mean, holy smokes! I know that you got to tier 8, 7.
I finished all researches and I just had my final space elevator projects to do,
Like,
and it was like 150 hours,
right,
200
like
hours.
just
Like
yeah. Okay, I just okay.
whereas Factorio, you can beat if you're speed running. I think the world record for the any percent is like 2 hours,
Jeez, that's ridiculous.
which for me it took me like 40-ish hours.
Right.
Most of my challenge runs that I do, like achievement hunts and stuff like that, take me anywhere from 20 to 30 hours, depending upon what I'm doing.
Okay. So I suppose the last thing I think that might be important to talk about is different modes of gameplay.
Yep.
Multiplayer.
Okay.
Can you collaborate? Can you non-collaborate? Is it? And then modding.
Oh, let's start with Satisfactory for this one. Um, there's one game mode essentially,
Yep.
but you can toggle features on and off in it. So
Okay.
you can have animals be like pacifist, so they only attack you if you attack them, or you can just have them completely non-hostile.
Be nice.
Um, multiplayer, you can do, I think it's you can do peer to peer, and you can also do dedicated servers
Okay.
for Satisfactory. And in most of the games, there's not a whole lot that changes in multiplayer. Um, Factorio is a little bit different. Um, and then in Satisfactory, what was the last thing? It was
Modding.
modding. I have not dabbled in modding at all in Satisfactory.
Okay. Do you think is there modding in
There is
Satisfactory?
modding,
Okay.
yes. I think most people, like big YouTubers and stuff, and people that do mega builds, they only run one mod that I know of, and that's an increased inventory size.
That would be not terrible.
And that's because they're trying to build things in a timely manner, so they don't want to have to run back and forth all the time to grab
Right.
materials.
Right. Yeah.
So they produce all the materials they need, and then just put them in their backpack and go do their builds.
That would make sense.
Factorio is kind of a modder's paradise.
Okay.
There's mods for everything. Overhaul mods, all sorts of crazy different things.
Kind of seems like they made that game with the idea that they wanted the modding community to be part of it.
There's a mod section in the main menu,
Right.
and it's all done in client.
Which I don't think there is in Satisfactory.
No.
If you're gonna mod that, you have to do it through like the.
I think you have to go through like I don't even think there's Steam Workshop.
No?
I think you have to do it through game files, the old school way.
Oh, jeez.
Probably through Vortex or
Right.
something like that. Factorio multiplayer has tons of scenarios.
Okay.
So like there's team buildings, there's PvP, there's
It's the same concept. The maps. It's all seed.
yeah, it's
Okay.
it's all seeded, yeah.
Okay.
And then there's like Rocket Rush, just tons of game modes.
Okay.
And you can download even more game modes in the mod pack. And multiplayer is awesome in Factorio. You can do dedicated servers, you can do peer-to-peer, you can do LAN even.
No.
It has stuff for
I haven't
LAN.
done that in a long time.
So yeah, I think both games are great.
Okay.
They're both worth anybody's time. If you're new to the factory genre and you have and you like a sort of PvE survival element, I'd say go to Factorio.
Right.
If you are a just someone who wants a chill game to get into with the factory games and just build stuff, um, and you'd like better graphics and have a better computer, I would say go Satisfactory.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
But I don't want to shy people away from Factorio either. You can play on creative mode or enemy-less mode where there's no enemies.
Right.
So don't feel like you have to play against enemies all the time
Right.
in Factorio. You don't have to.
No, that would, yeah.
Both of these games are extremely customizable within the game itself.
Is it ease of learning?
Um, I think Factorio, no, they're both easy to learn.
Okay.
You can play by gut feeling on both of them, or you can play completely with mathematical ratios and formulas if you
Ugh.
want. You're perfectly fine either way.
Okay.
Satisfactory does a better job of telling you how many you're outputting and how many you're using and what your efficiency rates are. Factorio requires a little bit of reading and digging to figure it out.
Okay. Alrighty. Well, I don't know how long we've been, but I think we've covered a lot of stuff, and I don't think there's. I mean, we went over everything. I think we went over resources. We went over complexities, easy use. I personally have played Satisfactory. I found it fairly easy and fairly entertaining, and it definitely is a laid back game.
Yes.
Other than the random hog shoving you off the edge of a cliff and
Yep.
you have to run back to take care of business. But
Yep.
for the most part, it seemed fairly passive.
Yeah, it's definitely the more chill of the two.
The stuff I've seen you guys play, and then the other people I know talking about Factorio, there seems to be a level of anticipation and anxiety to it when you're.
Well, a lot of that is
That's the
because we're
buyers.
playing challenge rather
Right.
than that. Because it's been out so long and we played so much, we're trying
Right.
to make it more difficult.
Yeah. So, anything else you want to add to the end?
No, just check it out on Steam. Any of those two games, they're both fairly cheap. Satisfactory still in early access.
I would say that Satisfactory comes on sale more often than Factorio.
Factorio does not go on sale.
No,
ever.
I don't think I've ever seen it.
No, they just do not go on sale ever.
I don't remember what the price was on the game.
It's $35 US dollars for Factorio, and I think it's $29.99 for Satisfactory.
Yeah, but that'll go on sale every time there's a Steam sale or whatever.
Both games are great. Play them both.
Alrighty.
Spend lots of hours. That's all I got.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Until next time.
Well, we'll see you next time.